You can categorize wins a whole bunch of different ways. I think we'll go with ugly, sloppy, and maybe stop right there when talking about the Gators win on Saturday against Vandy, 13-6. As about a 2-touchdown favorite, Florida went to Nashville, and they do come home and survive with the win, mostly because of the defense or the Vandy offense. David Waters, myself, come your way each and every week for Gators Breakdown. It's part of the SEC Breakdown Network, a number of podcasts, both audio and video along the way. You can catch us on Facebook and Twitter at SEC Breakdown. Your Gators podcast, Gators Breakdown with David. He's the mainstay, so I join him about half the time. Joey V jumps on board for the midweek Gators Breakdown. So, David, 13-6. We had talked a number of times leading into this game. What are we going to see out of the Gators? Are they going to be hungover from the Tennessee comeback, or are they going to come out fired up, ready to make a statement, show that they put this behind them, and they're going to make a run for the SEC East regardless?
Yeah, and it wasn't what most Gator fans wanted to see. It was another, you go back to UMass, North Texas, and now Vanderbilt. It's another overmatched opponent that you would expect Florida to handle. And once again, this team comes out with no fire. Was it a hangover from the Tennessee game last week? Maybe. But, maybe I look at it different. If it's me playing in the game, which I'm not, of course, I'm playing kind of ticked off from the way I showed up last week and the way that game ended. And this team really just come out and, yes, on the first drive, they did try and go deep to Callaway, but Appleby was way off, throws the ball out of bounds when Callaway had a 3-4 step lead on the defender. But, there was still no creativity like that we saw in the first half versus Tennessee and like we saw against Kentucky. The offensive line, again, is another question that just shows its head, every week now. And it's another big question of what happened. But my main question is, why does this team just come out time after time again and just not showed any desire to play? Is it Luke Del Rio not being quarterback? Is he, the true leader on this team and him not in the huddle? Does that slow it? Does that slow the leadership and the fire down a little bit? Maybe so, but like I said, North Texas and UMass was basically the same story, and he played in those games and slow starts. So, it's a question I think we can start raising with this team. Are they taking on the persona of their head coach? Jim McElwain's kind of a laid back and arrogant in a way, but Florida fans don't mind arrogant. We have Steve Spurrier, for God's sake. So, we don't mind the arrogance. But when you have the arrogance and you're getting the results you're getting right now, I think that's when Gator fans are starting to question of just a little bit, why this team so much is just come out and can't put teams that they're better than, and we know they are better than, away.
Yeah, there's a bunch of theories I think you can go with here, Dave. These kids go out there 12 times a year. So like you just said a minute ago, we've never been college football players and certainly not at that level. We've played some competitive sports here and there, but nothing close to what we're talking about here. But we would expect, just based on pride and showing that you are the man on that particular day, regardless of who you're lining up against, that you want to dominate that opponent. If you're playing somebody that you can dominate or have the potential to dominate, that you would take that pride. Again, it's not a baseball season. It's 12 times a year. Another statement is just, being pissed off, angered about what happened the week before and coming out and taking that out on somebody. The other is just a very practical way of looking at it and knowing that Tennessee has a difficult few weeks coming up. They've got Texas A&M, they've got Alabama, and you need them to drop 2 games, and it almost happened. And at that point, you didn't know what was going to happen later in the day. They almost lost to Georgia, of course. It came within inches or seconds of losing to the Bulldogs. So just thinking, hey, we need to get better. We need to take care of business. And even if Tennessee takes care of business, we finish 11-1, 10-2, and we get to a great bowl game. But there is a big opportunity possibly that they slip up twice against that schedule, and we backdoor our way into the SEC East, as we've seen many times in the last 5 to 10 years. So you would think the motivation would be there.
You would think, and I just hark back that it gets tiring for Gator fans to see this, and a lot of it's and like you said, Mark, there are factors that go into this. Yes, they were with a backup quarterback on the road for the second week in a row. The offensive line can't bust a grape right now. Show no fire, show no desire. Some of that's play calling to me. I think you can look at when this Florida offense gets up tempo a little bit and stops, the delayed handoffs right now are killing this offensive line. They can't block long enough for this type of offense, and they keep continuing to run it. But when they sit back and it's a straight handoff and you just tell the running back to go north and south, that's when this offensive line and the offenses look good. But they want to get in a shotgun and let a running back choose his hole, and it's not working. The offensive line cannot do that right now. So play calling, I think, is part of it. There's no, the screen game was non-existent yesterday from the running backs when it's worked so well this year. There's not a lot that this offense is doing to help the offensive line either. In my opinion, it is it's a catch-22. The offensive line isn't that great, so you can't run your full offense even with Allison Appleby as you can with Luke Del Rio. But it's also, I think, you can help their offensive line a little bit. They're not rolling the pocket, like I said. There's no, everything's delayed handoffs, but now you have Jordan Scarlett in, who's dominating on one drive, doesn't get another carry for 25 minutes in game time. And we've raised this question before: can they keep 4 running backs in the rotation? And to me, it looks like it's hurting right now. Jordan Scarlett, to me, has been the most consistent running back. He scores a touchdown yesterday, dominates on the drive, and doesn't get a ball again for 25 minutes. So there's a lot of factors going into why this offense hasn't looked its best. But I see 2 things: a lack of focus, a lack of fire, a lack of leadership, and a little bit of play calling to help that offensive line.
So we got 35 attempts rushing the football. That includes everything. That includes wide receivers. That includes quarterbacks out of the pocket, improv type plays when they have to take off and run. But basically 30 to 35 carries out of all the running backs. And you mentioned Scarlett with 12. He hasn't necessarily emerged for some reason, whatever they're saying, that he needs to get the ball, despite the one impressive drive relying mostly on him. The one thing I'll throw out, I know you may want to dive more back into the running game, but that your statement was pretty emphatic there that they just need to settle on one back, and he seems to be the guy. Obviously, the other guys need to come in, give him a break, and wrestle away 5 to 8 carries, but he should probably get 20 to 22 carries, something in that range. I'm not going to put much of this on Vandy because I think this is almost all about Florida, but we'll give Vandy a little bit of credit because this might not be a real good matchup to look good. If you're the type team that Florida is, where you don't have that quarterback, you struggle offensively along the offensive front. Of course, we know Vandy's very capable on defense. They're going to take the air out of the ball. They're going to squeeze the game down. You're not going to get the full 60 minutes of game time because they're going to run the play clock. They're going to run, as they did Ralph Webb, 24 times, and they were pretty effective running the ball. So did you see anything up front out of Florida? Obviously, they gave up 6 points, so we can only be so critical. But Vandy did chew up some time running the ball and being pretty effective.
Going back to that, I question, there was, at the second half of the Tennessee game and what we saw with Vandy, they were gashing this Gator defensive lineman. But, a little bit yesterday was a little bit more excusable. So many injuries. Joey Ivey was ruled out during the week. But, Brian Cox, Jordan Sherritt were limited. Like I said, Ivy was out, and Caleb Brantley missed some time too. So there was a point in that game where none of the starting defensive linemen were on the field for Florida, and Vanderbilt took advantage. It's like I said, that's part of. I don't think they were fired up to play another noon road game in Vanderbilt, but you had some young guys. You had Antonius Clayton making his first appearance of the season, burning his red shirt. I don't necessarily think it was because of injuries. I really think Florida coaches just really wanted to get him on the field. But you also know Jakai Polite, Jabari Zuniga. They were all on the field. So you had a lot of young guys, a lot of backups on the field for this Florida defense. And like you said, they held on to 6 points. The corners, the DBs, they did their job. And Alex Anzalone, Jared Davis were everywhere. Jared Davis had some really good pass deflections in this game, showing up, one of his weaknesses in his game. But he really showed up in pass defense. But, yeah, it was more so on this Florida defensive line, playing some young guys, having some experienced guys injured. I think you didn't want to test them with LSU coming up, but you kind of have to be worried with LSU coming up. The second half against Tennessee, Vanderbilt being able to, put some yards on this Florida defensive line. They need to get tougher, and Jim McElwain mentioned that yesterday. But like I said, I think part of it comes from him as well. You need to show up. You need to show some toughness. You need to show some physicality, especially with LSU and another pissed off team in LSU coming to the Swamp next week. Playing for a new head coach that, they believe themselves in. They looked a lot better against Missouri. So, Florida, the biggest question, coming up is just answer the bell, be physical on both sides of the ball.
So Austin Appleby goes 19 of 28. So that looks decent, but he gets 144 yards out of it. You alluded to it at the top of the show, just in regards to him not being able to connect with Callaway for big yardage. So they didn't get a whole lot out of the passing game in terms of making meaningful plays. You can make the stats look okay by gaining 5 and 6 yards on pass plays down to the running back and the check off, and you go 19 for 28, but it really wasn't effective.
Right, and there were times, like you mentioned, the first drive, Callaway, he overthrows him, and there was another drive late in the game when they're in the red zone. Austin Appleby sails the ball out of the back of the end zone. Antonio Callaway sitting right in front of the goal line, wide open. Appleby never sees him. So if you go back to preseason and what we've heard about Luke Del Rio and Austin Appleby, these were the things that were holding Austin Appleby back a little bit. His most effective target, if you want to call this effective, DeAndre Goolsby, 8 receptions, but only 37 yards. So he only had 4.5 yards per catch there. So, he was checking down a lot to DeAndre Goolsby, and Antonio Callaway only having 3 receptions. And another thing I want to see from this Florida offense, and maybe it's quarterback play holding this back a little bit, but Antonio Callaway needs to be getting the ball in his hands 10 times a game. He needs to be like McElwain, Doug Nussmeier need to come up with a game plan, much like Alabama and Lane Kiffin does when they have a big-time star receiver. Callaway can't prove anymore that he needs the ball in his hands. And, he's the best playmaker Florida has. They need to get him the ball whichever way possible. And another step in helping this offense is getting your playmakers the ball. So Antonio Callaway is your most consistent playmaker, your most consistent threat to make something happen, and he's only getting 3 catches. So, there's a lot of questions with this offense, and, fans are starting to get restless a little bit. A lot of Jim McElwain's Florida career so far in a season and a half has pretty much been, played with a backup quarterback, minus the first half of Will Grier last year. But if you go back and look at it, even with Grier, you had 2 quarters or 1 quarter against Tennessee, the next week against Ole Miss, and that's really all you can point to for a successful offense from Jim McElwain. So it's, we've seen what this offense can be, but we've also seen what this offense can be bad, and that's what we've seen most of. So, I hate to sound, spoiled for Gator fans and that way, but a lot are just starting to question, the direction of this offense for a season and a half now, where, yes, it would get better because Treon Harris was at quarterback. Well, we've only seen that against Kentucky this year. Everything else has looked just like that offense, pretty much. So, it's time to start for this offensive line to start gelling. It's been a question for, seasons now for Florida, and they can't get it together. Now, so with the offensive line troubles, and we mentioned Austin Appleby, that just it pretty much did spell doom a little bit for Florida yesterday, and they came out with a win. But there's a lot of questions now surrounding this team heading into LSU.
So your channel overall is SEC Breakdown. So if you love the SEC, catch us on Twitter and Facebook at SEC Breakdown. You can also check our video podcasts on YouTube and on iTunes for the audio version. But this is a Gators Breakdown as part of SEC Breakdown with David Waters, myself, Mark Rogers. We got Joey V jumping on midweek with David to set us up this week for the LSU game. So we can talk a little bit about that. I know that we'll talk more on SEC Breakdown on Wednesday night, and you and Joey will knock it out as well. But what's a bit concerning at this point is the score of the Missouri game at 42-7. So we know that LSU is top 5 talent. If we look across the country and we measure talent, and the best way to do that is look at the recruiting rankings and then look at the transition to the NFL, and LSU is always right there. Top 5 to 10 talent in the country. And they seem to have gotten it together to a certain degree yesterday. And I'm not going to overplay one game. We see it every week. I think you tweeted out sometime over the weekend, Dave. You get different teams every week. So you have a few that you can count on across the country, but they're very few and far between. And the rest of them, who knows at certain times. So not going to overplay LSU, but Ed Orgeron seems to have worked this magic before where he can inspire a team, rally a team. And if we get LSU playing the way that they're capable, I don't think they're going to make a run for the SEC West. But, man, that's going to be difficult because to date, Florida's played 5 games, four teams that they could handle. They've looked really good maybe against Kentucky, and then the other efforts not so much. The one team that could match them in talent, obviously they dropped it in the second half at Tennessee. Now they're going to face a team that's at least as talented, if not more so, and more complete than they are.
Yeah, you can look at some positives going into this game for Florida to maybe turn around, the last 6 quarters that we've seen from this team. More than likely they get Luke Del Rio back, a starting quarterback. You should start having some injured guys show up. Tyler Jordan played a little bit yesterday in the second half against Vanderbilt, so you'll get him back on the offensive line as another guy you can stick there. And defensive linemen, there should, no major injuries coming out of that Vanderbilt game yesterday, so you'll should be okay there. But it's like I said, it's coming out and wanting to play. It's a noon game, which is rare for a Florida LSU game to be at noon, but an ESPN game, just. I guess programs are, of course, after Florida lost to Tennessee and LSU firing their coach, ESPN, it's still a big enough game for ESPN and too big for SEC Network. So that's why I got stuck in that noon slot there. But, it's a noon game, and, fans, are usually late arriving to the home noon games for the Swamp. And, pointing to LSU, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's only one game, but, they look much better against Missouri. Missouri, I guess we were resting their laurels on, they own the teams they were better than and shown it. But they did falter against Georgia, West Virginia in the first game of the season, and then just got completely steamrolled by an LSU team that was probably just ready to play for a new coach and show what they have. So I was one of the few who picked that upset of Missouri and LSU. So I wish I could have that back, but it's There's points I said you could point to. Getting Luke Del Rio back, who I think is your leader on this team, you get him back in the huddle. And maybe just it's the first home game in 2 weeks now when you played on the road in Tennessee twice against the Vols and Vanderbilt. So you get your home crowd back, and maybe it's time to just show them something. I hate to sound like a broken record every week, but it's just this team has to come out with something. Has to come out with we saw and we did see it against Tennessee. You're up 21-0, aggressive play calling. That's what we need to see against LSU. I think this was definitely so far is the best defense Florida has faced coming to far this year. So that's the big question. I think you're coming in with a lot of questions on offense against the best defense one of the best defenses you'll probably play all season. And that secondary for LSU is very, very strong. So, Luke Del Rio is coming back with 2 weeks off. Can he be in the rhythm of things and going against a very good secondary in LSU who really only right now they have to worry about Antonio Callaway. So, this running game really needs to get going. Jordan Scarlett needs to get a majority of the carries and, show something, show some pride. But if, the way I'm looking at this game right now, I don't, after seeing the last 6 quarters for Florida, can they really flip a switch with Luke Del Rio coming in? Maybe that's the switch that needs to be flipped. But right now I have a lot more questions, and it's weird. This is going to be Ed Orgeron's second game as head coach, and I have more questions right now about Florida than I do about LSU.
What I'm going to be interested to see, Dave, and I like the big storyline and like the narrative and the comparisons, whether it's between conferences, but in this standpoint, it's going to be between divisions. So for 8 years, the West has clearly been better than the East. We don't have a whole lot to go on this season, but this week we've got LSU and Florida. We got Tennessee and Texas A&M. The two indicators we've got so far that mean something, obviously Alabama, Kentucky, and we'll even take Alabama out of the mix and judge the East against the West minus Alabama at this point, unless somebody proves something in the West that we don't foresee. What we've got to go on at this point is Mississippi State's probably the worst team in the West, and South Carolina may or may not be the worst team in the East. They've got a win over Vandy, and they've got another SEC win. So, but South Carolina and Mississippi State and the Bulldogs win that by a couple touchdowns pretty easily. They got like a 24-0 lead at half. Georgia, who takes Tennessee to the wire, really outplayed them, I thought. Should have won the game, obviously, if they protect the Hail Mary. They go to Ole Miss 2 weeks ago, and that was not a game against teams that are pretty much seated in the same places, or you would think, in each division. So we'll see how it plays out, but our first indicators are that nothing's changed.
Correct. And I think if I remember off just off the top of my head, last season the only wins the East had over the West was Florida's blowout versus Ole Miss and Georgia beating Auburn. So I think that was the only two East versus West wins last year. So yeah, it's been a trend that's ever since, probably 2009 when Bama beat Florida in the SEC championship game, that shifted the whole conference to the West a good bit. So yeah, it's another. And Florida, I think, Florida hasn't beat LSU since 2012. So there's a little bit of a streak there going since, Will Muschamp's second year, and Florida in that run game with Mike Gillislee just dominated LSU. But ever since then, it's been lucky bounces from Les Miles and LSU, and fake punts and fake field goals, and it's just been, Florida fans are probably glad to see Les Miles not on that sideline because it just seems whenever he comes to the Swamp, something crazy happens with LSU there. So yeah, it's another East versus West matchup. Hasn't been too promising for the East lately, but maybe Florida can pull some of that magic we saw last year when they played Ole Miss in the Swamp. To get another East versus West win. But the trend is there, and LSU is definitely coming off of a much better looking performance against similar teams. Vanderbilt and Missouri, going into this season, we pretty much thought we're pretty on equal ground, where actually a lot of people picked Vanderbilt to finish fourth in the East behind Florida, Georgia, Tennessee. So, similar teams there, but LSU is coming much off of a much better performance this past week, than Florida is.
All right, so you can hear it right there. Here's your Twitter follow. Gator Dave _SEC. Gator Dave _SEC. Join him right there for tons of Gator talk and the entire SEC. We follow it all right here. Gators breakdown twice a week. You got David and myself. You got David and Joey V. And this is part of SEC Breakdown with myself, David, Chad Niepling, and Mike Laval. We come your way on Wednesday night on YouTube with the video version, and you can follow us on iTunes and find us there, Facebook and Twitter as well. We cover the entire SEC. All right, David, I think it's a wrap.
Think so. A lot of little bit of steam to get out of there.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Gators Breakdown. See you next time.